Welcome to the Mike Gormley Show. We're heard all over the place on radio in Philadelphia and Boston and New York and of course Los Angeles. And then it goes to podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Apple and Spotify and all those places. Today we have literally a longtime friend of mine for I don't know how far back, but like to meet Rich Ezra with us. Hi, Rich.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you. How you doing?
Doing well. Doing
Good.
well. Keeping
Good.
busy.
Yeah, we go back. I think it's more than 30 years.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we met when you were at A&M Records, although we were there at the same time.
We were there at the same time. Yeah, you and Miles were across the way with Jay, at IRS. Because I remember your name when I was in promotion. Charlie Miner or Al Monet or any of those guys. It's Mike Gormley calling.
Well,
So I
there he
remember
is.
your name exactly. So when I met you after all those years, it was putting that all together.
And boy, those names you just mentioned, if they're both gone now, but those were in the days of the music industry where radio ruled.
Yeah.
And you got a song on the radio, you were making somebody's career. Those guys, particularly Charlie, were just powerhouse people, and constantly on. I had the opportunity to be a radio promotion guy at one point, and I said, no, I can't do that. That's just constant, hyper, that sort of thing, salesman kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in those days, it was. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Did
And
you ever
Charlie was
actually get that?
consummate. He was
Charlie was
the consummate.
anybody look up the name Charlie Miner. It's quite a story. There actually was a movie on one of the cable channels, the Charlie Miner story. That's how crazy his life was. Would they give you an opportunity to actually call stations when you were an intern?
Yes, I did. I helped out. I remember I was doing calling out a lot of the pop stations and P2 and P3. There's like P1, P2, P3 on records. Brothers Johnson, I remember, was one, and they took that all the way to number one. Stomp, and a few others. Yeah, absolutely. And then sometimes Marco Babineau, who did AOR promotion for rock, I would do some calls to stations for him as well.
So that must have been invaluable training, if you will. I mean, you weren't there a real long time, but you probably picked up a lot of good information.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in those days, radio promotion was the key thing. I mean, that was the vehicle you used in terms of, marketing records to the public. I mean, there was press, but it wasn't as significant in the early 80s as radio was. Radio was the thing that culture, went around. So you would use radio to drive people to retail. I mean, it was very, very simple, and there was only a finite number of records that could, make the chart. It's an interesting point because it was a time when, when we look back, we think like, well, that was just the business then, but it was so much smaller in terms of just the amount of artists that were put out.
Yeah.
And the training that I got there was really invaluable. I mean, that was how I started in the business. That was, I started at Record World magazine and, only lasted there like a week because they couldn't hire someone. I was hired as a driver, which it was a trade publication, much like Billboard and Cashbox. But the company, the corporate people told me I couldn't keep the job because I didn't qualify for the car insurance. Because a company that size kept a very big insurance policy on their drivers. And the insurance company wouldn't give that kind of a policy coverage to anyone under the age of 26 at that time. So I lost the gig. And then after that, I went to A&M in radio promotion. I did that for like 9 months.
Uh-huh. And but then you went to Arista Records, right?
Yes, I did.
Arista Records, you were working with people like Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston, and were you doing radio there? Oh no, you're doing A&R, weren't you?
I was doing radio promotion, Northwest AC promotion, which stands for Adult Contemporary initially. I was doing that initially, contacting stations, because Arista had a huge AC roster. They had Aretha, they had Dionne Warwick, they had Barry Manilow, they had Air Supply. So, they were very, very heavily involved with radio and especially AC promotion. Even some Alan Parsons records, who was a rock artist, but his records would get on AC radio.
Yeah.
So I did that for, I guess it must have been the first year when I went to Arista in 1981. And then I went over and I met a guy named Bud Scapa, and he was the director of A&R, and I used to help him out. I used to like get his tapes in order and listen to stuff for him and give him notes and get his desk in order and get things, help him out. And then eventually I went down to A&R full time after about a year and a half.
I first met Bud when he was with Rolling Stone magazine, and then I hired him at Mercury Records.
Yeah.
And he was doing publicity and so on, and then A&M took him away, which that's who took me away from Mercury Records as well. A few years later, I went to A&M. So
Right.
Those are great labels, but how did you you were doing radio, but you're doing A&R at Arista. What did that entail at that time? Because big names like Whitney Houston, you don't usually get in the same room as somebody like that.
Well, there was a big distance between my joining Arista and then Whitney. It was a couple of years. I joined Arista in 1981, in January of 81. And I did radio for probably maybe 5-6 months there before moving into A&R. And then, I left radio promotion altogether and just did, worked in the A&R department, which at that time was all primarily it was about finding acts, but it was also a great part of the A&R's job at that time was finding songs for the artists on the label, because we had a lot of artists that did not write their own material. Artists were not, the artists that were on Arista were not self-contained, so they needed to have the hit songs. They needed to have those songs that would become singles. For Aretha, for Dionne Warwick, for Air Supply, for Manilow, for other artists that we had, Phyllis Hyman, so forth. And it was because these people were not writers. So that was a big part of the A&R job in the initial years.
Was that fun or grueling trying to find you?
It was both, actually. It was a lot of fun, but what I learned is, I learned about what makes a hit song from Clive during that period. How to listen to a song, how to determine, whether a song would work or not, how to really understand, is this lyric, moving me? Is this lyric something that would be believable coming out of this particular artist's mouth? I mean, he would point things out that were, you wouldn't necessarily think of, just in terms of tone and in terms of, would a 40-year-old woman sing this lyric? When you would like get a song like that would be for a much younger person,
Yeah.
He was given a song called "I'm Saving All My Love for You" for Aretha or for Dionne Warwick initially, before he gave it to Whitney Houston. And the reason he gave it to Whitney was because he said that lyric would never be believable coming out of their mouth. You would not believe that lyric from a 42-year-old woman.
Right.
It wouldn't make sense. And yet, people often didn't think of those kinds of things. So it was a real education, and one that I value immensely in terms of songs and in terms of A&R.
You were there when Whitney Houston broke through?
Yes, I was. I was there when we signed her. This was an artist that he found, Whitney was singing 2 songs in her mother's nightclub act. Her mother was a very famous singer, Cissy Houston.
Just passed away a few weeks ago.
Just passed away, 95. And she sang 2 songs in her mother's act. She came out and sang 2 songs. And, Jerry Griffith, who was an A&R guy in New York, had been hearing about this great artist, Whitney Houston, and he kept begging Clive, please come down, please come down. She would do the gig every week or 2 at Sweetwater's, a club in New York City at the time. And so finally, Clive came, and at the time that he came, word had gotten around about this great singer, Whitney Houston, who was Cissy's daughter. And all she did was come out and do those 2 songs, and it was just based on those 2 songs that Clive signed her.
Amazing.
And it was in 83 that he did that. But we didn't put the first initial record out till like, 85. And it was because he took such an incredible amount of time finding all the right material, getting the right producers, putting her together with each and every song to make sure that, this was the right thing for her. He really believed in her.
Was he
And
drive was it driving her crazy? Was she like, come on, let's go, let's go?
no,
She
she totally
understood.
trusted Clive. It wasn't driving her crazy at all.
Hmm.
She knew that she was in the hands of somebody who really understood what she was about, who she was, where she was coming from. And you know, she had a lot of success. I mean, Clive always said that she would be big. He never thought that she would be that big that soon.
Really?
And that was the thing. Yeah. I mean, your first seven singles as number one hits. I mean, that's unprecedented.
Unbelievable.
That's never been done prior, and it's never been done since. Your first seven singles being number one hits. I mean, nobody's had that. I've heard of, five number one hits off of one album. Michael Jackson did that and Katy Perry did that, but nobody's had seven number one hits as their first seven singles. So,
It's going way back. The Beatles had number
yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, which was unprecidented
Yeah,
and had never been done. Yeah,
never been done since.
that's right.
Well,
That's right.
that's it's interesting getting into. I didn't mean to get into your background so much because I have other things to ask you, but it's
Sure.
fascinating.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. It was a different time.
we're going to slip out to a commercial now. We're going to listen on the way out to "You Get What You Give," the New Radicals. Sorry. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Thanks. Are you there, Jeremiah?